Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Expand Your B2B Offering Globally. My name is Michelle Eisenberg, and I am a program assistant here at the NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center. And for those of you who may not know, the NASDAQ Center is a nonprofit building a better path for entrepreneurs worldwide by improving inclusion, access, and knowledge in entrepreneurship. So as you will see in the chat in a moment, the NASDAQ Center provides programs, resources, and exceptional mentorship to entrepreneurs across all races, industries, and geographies. So definitely make sure to check out those links and resources in the chat. And then just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. First, let us know where you're dialing in from in the chat. We always love to connect. And second, we are going to open up for live Q&A at the end of the event. So please make sure to submit your questions for us in that Q&A function at the bottom of your screen throughout the presentation, and we will try our best to get to all of them. And of course, none of what we do could be possible at the center without all of the amazing support from our sponsors, including NASDAQ, Lehigh University, BMO, Airbnb, KPMG, Wilson Sonsini, Woodruff Sawyer, Microsoft Entrepreneurship for Positive Impact, BPM, and HubSpot for Startups. We are humbled by their contributions and hope you are grateful too. And so before we get started, we always like to just launch a couple polls to step back and see how everyone in the room is doing today. So this first one is going to ask, how are you feeling? Fearful, anxious, surviving, or optimistic? I'll give it just another moment for people to submit a response here. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. End that poll, share these results. Looks like optimism is in the lead, but definitely have some feelings of anxiety and surviving. Hopefully some of what we go over today will help address some of those feelings. So I'm going to stop sharing that poll and launch the second poll. What is keeping you up at night? Finance, sales, marketing, scale, pivot, team, or surviving? And this one just tells us a little bit more about your current needs as an entrepreneur, so we can continue to provide meaningful programming to all of you. So I'll give it just one more moment. All right. I'm going to end that poll, share these results. All right. Looks like sales is in the lead, fitting for our conversation today, but we have marketing, scale, and team coming up behind. So thank you. We will take this into account for future programming. Gonna stop sharing that poll. And without any further delay, please join me in giving the warmest welcome to our special guest, Kimberly Daniels, president at Mercantile Logistics and International Trade, Inc. Kimberly, we are super excited to have you here today. Thank you for joining us, and I'm going to pass it right over to you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm hoping that what I have to give today is going to be helpful to every entrepreneur out there. International trade can be quite complicated if you haven't experienced that already. So I'm going to go into a little bit of what I do, what my experience is. So this is who I am. I've been doing this job for quite some time. My company has been in existence for almost 10 years. It'll be next month. And I've been working in international trade for most of my life. So I'm not going to tell you how old I am. Let's see if we can get this to advance here. There we go. So we're going to talk about basics, what you need to know. So your export is my import, or your import is my export, right? So this is kind of a bilateral situation. Everybody who is expecting to import goods, someone else is exporting it, and vice versa. So this is pretty much how most of the countries operate. I can only speak expertly on how the United States operates for importation, and then also a bit on exportation. But most other countries, they kind of go through a lot of the same thing. So we're going to go over the terms, how you describe your products, talking about the origin of the goods, setting up our setup requirements, meaning like, bank account information and EIN and that sort of thing. The actions that happen at destination, tips for saving some money, some time, and some headaches, and then choosing this type of solution that you need for your particular business can vary. We'll also go a little bit into foreign importers, because I do see that there's some people coming in from other countries. So we'll talk about foreign importers and the United States as well. So feel free to screenshot this. This is also recorded. So if you want to take this down, basically these are the words. Words have meaning. And that's something that I think most people don't realize, because they'll talk about shipper thinking the carrier. And it's actually the shipper is the one who loses the product because it's being exported out of their facility. The carrier is the one who actually carries the product. So these words actually have a lot of meaning in my industry. So it's very important that you understand what these words mean when you're talking to somebody else. Also, one thing I haven't added in here is HTS to the HTS one is Schedule B. Schedule B is very much like HTS. It's almost identical with a few changes. So it's kind of like fraternal twins. There's a lot of things that are similar, but there are some things on it that are just a little bit different. So when you're trying to export from the United States, your Schedule B may not be the same as your HTS code. Okay, so I'm a licensed customs broker. I have been a licensed customs broker for 10 years. It is one of the most frustrating things I've done, but also one of the most rewarding. There's a lot of complications. There's a lot of changes. But one of the things that I always tell my clients that I need to know is everything about your baby. It's your product, right? So whether you're importing it or exporting it, you got to tell me everything about it. And that's really important for the receiving party to be able to do all kinds of different imports. I do see there is a question that's popped up, which is why I got sidetracked. We can talk about software and cloud-based products, those are what's called deemed exports, right? So if you're exporting a non-tangible good, that is a deemed export. It is still regulated from the United States when being exported to another country. So for example, if there is some kind of sanction against another country, that software or cloud-based solution can be considered a deemed export. So it gets a little complicated, and it's something that we probably should take offline. So feel free to contact me later and I'll tell you more about how that works. Origin details. So the origin of your product is based on the overall essence that your product has when it's complete. So for example, if you have parts of a pen and you are trying to figure out what that origin is, where did it become a pen, right? Same thing with phones, cases, those kinds of things. You want to say, okay, the origin is really important to know, but it's where it gains its overall essence as a product and functionality. The origin determines the free trade accessibility. So if your goods are made in Israel or Egypt or Nicaragua or there's all kinds of different free trade agreements. That is something that you want to look at and say, okay, if I make my product, let's say in South Korea, as opposed to China, will I be saving a little more money because it's coming from a free trade country? So you have to figure out what those landed costs look like. Some people say no, some people say yes, but you have to do that math and figure it out if it works. Quotes are also based on the origin information provided by the shipper. So it could be, wherever they're actually located. If they're located in a very rural part, it's going to cost a little more because it's harder to get to. You also have the cost of the actual goods themselves, the actual shipment, and what that looks like for size, weight, export requirements, that sort of thing. And that pertains to both sides. So if you're exporting it, let's say from the United States out, you also have to look at the regulatory requirements. So we have sanctions and embargoes against country. You have to make sure that you're not violating those, because yes, you will be fined. Doesn't matter how big you are. You have to find out if you need export licensing. Some products do from the United States, some products don't. Some products need export licensing from other countries to come to the United States. Some products don't. You really have to do that due diligence. So I always recommend work with somebody who's knowledgeable in the industry. You know, if it's me, my colleagues, that'd be great. But if you found somebody else who's been doing this for a long time, that's in your circle, talk to them. You know, typically I will take colleagues out for dinner and pick their brain. It's cheaper than paying their hourly fee. So that's another way to save some money. And then figure out what the terms of agreement are. Now, these Incoterms are super important. EXW is Ex Works. Basically, it means that if you're hiring a freight forwarder, they're going to pick up the shipment all the way from the factory as opposed to the port. Costs a little bit more, but it might be something that you need done because your factory doesn't have the capability to actually set up a carrier, right? Freight on board, that is from the port of origin. So let's say it's coming out of, Shenzhen, China. So you're probably going to use Yantian. Port of origin is FOB, and then it comes to the United States. CIF, CFR, that's from the shipper is taking care of it from their warehouse all the way to the port of destination. And then the importer takes care of it from the port of destination to delivery. DAP, delivered at place. So the shipper takes care of it from the port of, or from their warehouse all the way to your door, but you take care of the duties. Whereas DDP, they take care of the entire process. Now it sounds like DDP will be easier. It is not. It is actually a lot more complicated, and most companies won't support DDP if there's duties attached to the product. So that's something to be aware of. So this kind of is an illustration of what these different Incoterms do. So you can kind of get an idea of where it's coming from and how that works. I suggest keep this as a screenshot as well. This way, you know that, you can always reference it if you're trying to remember what means what. Now, this is the cost. So Ex Works is going to put most of the cost to the shipper, right? You're going to have a little less costs on that. But if you are DDP, most of the costs will fall on you. So it just kind of depends on who you're working with and how they set that up. CIF and CFR, those can be pretty much equal. CIF means insurance is included. CFR is just, cost of freight. So we usually see FOB. So this puts a little bit of cost on the shipper, the exporter, and then puts the rest of the freight cost on you. If you have a good forwarder, you have a good, delivery system, all of that kind of stuff, that can actually save you some money because you'll find it less than what your shipper is paying. So whenever you talk to a U.S. Customs broker, we are required to do a power of attorney. This is dictated by Customs. There's actually verbiage in the CFR that tells us what we, need to say on our power of attorney. There are some who put extra verbiage in their power of attorney to, basically cover for liability. But a power of attorney is required. I'm not even supposed to look up if you have a bond yet without having a power of attorney. So that's something to be aware of. You'll also have to have a bond. A bond is required for every import. It's also required for filing what's called an ISF, or an importer security filing. These come in singles and these come in continuous. So a single bond is good, just like it sounds, for that one shipment only. So a single ISF for ocean, a single entry, and you only use it the once. It costs less unless you're importing often. If you're importing more than 4 times a year, a continuous bond actually costs you a lot less because you don't have to pay for the single bond, and you are covering, all entries up to $500,000 of duty payments. So it can actually be really good. So if you're looking at importing, 5 or more times a year, we recommend getting a continuous bond. And then I require, and not all brokers do this, but I require every one of my clients to have an ACH directly with Customs. The only exception is those foreign importers, and only if the duties are going to be pretty low. The reason for this is there's a lot of liability on both parties. There's liability for me. If you don't pay me, we're going to have a problem. There's liability for bankruptcy. If a company goes bankrupt, and they are clawing back payments that they've made, they can actually claw back the duties from the customs broker who's already paid it to the government. So what I do is I say, you know what? I'm just not going to cover them. So if you're working with me, I'm going to require you to sign up for an ACH. It takes a few days to get it approved. So we always recommend don't wait until the last minute. As soon as you know you have an ISF, which means an importer security filing, which has to be done prior to the goods leaving the origin port, we set you up. So that's something that we do. Not all brokers do that. Some brokers won't do that. So that's a business call. All right, complications. I could probably talk for an entire week straight of just complications when it comes to importing and exporting. There are food imports that require government agencies, obviously. You've got the FDA, Food and Drug Administration, and you've got the US Department of Agriculture. If you are importing into the United States, pretty much any type of fresh food, right? Or food made with very fresh ingredients, or any kind of meat or meat product, you're going to fall into USDA. Anything else, any kind of processed foods, you're looking at FDA at the very least. So the thing is to contact a customs broker before you start sending goods to the United States, because this will help you get set up prior to having problems. So you want to make sure that you're knocking all these doors down first before you find yourself in a very sticky problem. If you're trying to move any kind of gold bullion, dorade, any kind of diamonds, anything, it's getting even more complicated than it ever has been. And it's not just because of the nature of the product, but how that product is derived. Forced labor is one of the biggest subjects in today's international trade conversation. We've got the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act. We've got more forced labor laws that they've been in the books for a really long time, but now they're being really enforced. You should not have any forced labor in your supply chain. The biggest issue that we run into is that some countries don't consider it forced labor. It's training, it's on the job training, it's whatever excuse they want to use. But there are very specific laws and words that are used in defining forced labor. So it's really important that you do the due diligence, work with the subject matter expert, and make sure that your supply chain is as clean as you can get it. The thing is that even if you don't know, customs can still stop your stuff from coming into the United States. And a lot of countries are getting on the bandwagon of not allowing forced labor. So it's something that you need to talk to an expert in your area to make sure that when you're importing, you're not violating those laws. All right, destination actions. So in the United States, we have something called an ISF. This has to be filed prior to the goods departing the origin port, usually about 72 hours. You should get this information from your shipper long before you need it. Sometimes they wait a little too long getting it to you. We just say, keep contacting them, tell them that, hey, this has to be done. You are not allowed to send this out without this, about giving me the information I need so we can get it filed. It was originally scoped out to where you couldn't even put goods on a vessel without the ISF being filed. It was logistically too difficult to manage that. So now we just have a $5,000 fee if it's not filed timely. So make sure that you're working with your customs broker and you're working with your shipper to get that information to them if you have any ocean filing. Next, you'll have goods that are coming in. So it's been a couple of weeks. Let's say you source something from China and now you get an arrival notice. Make sure you get that arrival notice to your customs broker. And you can do this in one of two ways. You can make sure they're a notified party in your bill of lading, or you can just forward it to them. That's fine too. We always recommend that if you make sure the customs broker is on your bill of lading as the notified party, they will then be notified by the arrival notice, which means that if it gets stuck in your spam, which has happened, at least one of you is getting it. So we always recommend make sure your customs broker is the notified party on the bill of lading. You also need to provide them with other documents. You need to have a commercial invoice, a packing list, the bill of lading. So make sure that you're talking to your customs broker and that they have everything that they need. Next, the customs broker is going to process the clearance, process it on your behalf because they have a power of attorney. They're going to let you know what those duties are going to look like and when those are going to clear. and they'll clear straight, well, in my case, they'll clear straight from your bank account. And then you end up getting the paperwork that you need. And then you can ask for a delivery order from your customs broker, or if you're working with a freight forwarder, they may have their own. So either is fine. And these are the forms. So these are just generic forms that I've had for quite some time. But basically, if you look at the ISF filing, it's just asking for, the somewhat of the supply chain, who's the seller, who's the buyer, where was the container stuffed, who's consolidating it, that could be that should be the freight forwarder, and then where it's going and what the HTS code is, and then of course the master bill and the SCAC number. The commercial invoice, you would fill it out with most of that same information, as well as what the product is and the value, and then the packing list is what the product is and the weight and size. So these basically give your customs broker everything they need to know, so you don't have to, have email traffic or constant chatting about the things that, they need to know in order to get things processed. All right, so solution for saving time, money, and headaches. So there are some off-peak seasons for transport. Now, I say that, but since COVID, it's been a little bit wonky. It's not been the normal, we know that, late November through mid-January, it's right before Chinese New Year. That can be off-peak, March through early June. That's typically when the new contracts are going. But since OSRA, the Ocean Shipping Reform Act, the modifications with that, and since COVID, it's still settling down. But the prices have gone down substantially since a couple of years ago, which is excellent. And we are getting a little bit back on track to where we were. Insurance, we recommend if you're going to do a lot of shipping, get blanket insurance. You can go to Lloyd's of London and ask them, for what that looks like, depending on your product. And it works kind of like your car insurance, right? So you have your premium, you have your deductible. And then if you do have a loss, you have to go and show them the loss along with your paperwork, and then, pictures if you actually have damaged product. You can do it on a per shipment basis, which costs a little bit more, but if you're not shipping very often, it's actually more reasonable. But we sell it like 45 cents per $100 of value, which is probably mid-range. Some go higher, some go lower. There are minimums. So like, you can't go less than a certain amount depending on who you're working with. But that's pretty good. And it pays out a little bit faster, I've noticed. I mean, based on talking to some of my clients, the ones who have the blanket insurance, say it takes a little bit longer. But again, it's like, dealing with rental car insurance that you buy at the rental car counter versus, having your own insurance. It's going to take a little bit longer with your own. Also know your relationships. And I don't mean just, being friendly with your broker, which by the way, very important. we tend to, want to have a very good rapport with our clients, but also know your relationships with your supplier. You want to have a good rapport with them as well. Yes, they're working for you, but you need to have them on your side. So if anything goes wrong, they're more likely to help you, especially with forced labor, because a lot of times the culture just doesn't support the idea. So you have to say, hey, you know what, I'm going to need the bill of materials and where you got this stuff from, because customs is telling me that they're not going to allow it in until we do this. If you're very friendly with them, they're going to be more likely to work with you and, give you what you need, or at least send it directly to customs. Make sure you pay in full and on time. If you have any disputes, tell your agent. It's one of those things that you don't want to burn bridges in this industry, because you will get a reputation. So we all talk, and there's only 14,000 brokers in the entire United States. So, it's something to know that we all go to the same conferences and we all chat, and, you just got to be really astute to the idea that you want to make sure that you're keeping the people who are helping you out paid on time. If you're comparing, make sure that you're accounting for everything. It's really important to know that, one service might offer one, a type of a service that could include or not include customs brokerage. Another one may offer customs brokerage but not include consulting. So make sure you know what you're getting prior to, making that jump and signing that power of attorney. And then, choosing your solution that you need. There's a lot of solutions that you can do out there. If you're shipping small products, parcel services do tend to be priced better. They have the system already done. They're not charging you as much for the entry, and they're just, it's all going through their system. And if you're again, if it's a small shipment, you don't want to have to, bring in a customs broker and stuff unless the value is really high. Some freight forwarding services are better if you have more than a cubic meter, which is more than half a pallet. If it's more than 150 pounds, they do air freight okay, but usually you can save a lot more with ocean. And then for customs brokers, we do both air and ocean. We do cross-border. Parcel services typically provide customs brokerages in-house, sometimes for an extra cost, sometimes not. But they are going to be a little faster because they already have your stuff. Again, it's usually more inexpensive on a parcel service when you have a small shipment than when you're trying to do a large shipment. And then find out what other services they offer. Like I said, we offer a subscription program in my company. Most companies don't do that as far as I've ever heard. Some offer extensive consulting, especially if you're really worried about your supply chain having forced labor. And then on the foreign importers, I want to go ahead and touch on that. We can actually set up foreign companies to import into the United States and cover all those bills and everything that go along with that and the liability. So there is a lot of paperwork that has to be done. A continuous bond is required, of course, a power of attorney, but that is a possibility. So if you're looking at doing business with, let's say, Amazon won't be your importer of record. They refuse because of the liability. But we can set you up to where you're bringing in your goods and then it goes into the system and goes straight to Amazon. So that is something that can be done. So don't think just because you're located in a foreign place or your stuff's coming from you in your foreign place, you can't bring it into the US market and use fulfillment services. You absolutely can do that. I've been doing it for years. All right, so now we're down to questions. I think I hit my half hour. If anybody has anything they'd like to know about, I am happy to chat.
Awesome. Wonderful. I think to start, one question we get almost every time with entrepreneurs is, what are the common mistakes that you see first-time entrepreneurs making when they are first importing their product?
The biggest thing is expectations. They think that because their goods arrive in the port on the 20th of October, that they can just go pick them up. No. You actually cannot. It can, if you have a smaller shipment, like an LCL shipment that's a pallet or two, and you are seeing it come into the port on the 20th of October, more than likely you're not going to be able to get that to your door for another week or two, depending on how long it takes for the CFS that's picking up that container to pick it up, bring it to their warehouse, strip the container, and then make it available for your driver to pick it up. So that's one of the biggest issues. Another one is companies thinking that they're too small to be worried about. And that is so not the case. If you are a small company, the government will actually probably go after you first because you're low hanging fruit. The bigger companies tend to have compliance professionals and lawyers on staff. Most of the time, small companies are outsourcing to companies like mine. And so what we do is we just try to make sure we keep you on the right side of the law, so you don't have to worry about anything when it comes down to fines and penalties and forfeitures. Those are things that we really, really get worried about. So yeah, those things, you're never too small to fine.
Absolutely. We did have one question come in here about the signing over of the power of attorney, and who and when should that decision be made? Who's making it, and when would be, do you think, the ideal time for that step to be taken?
So the principal of the company is the one who has to sign the power of attorney. So it has to be somebody that's on the officer list or owns the company as a named owner. So that is who makes the decision on who to go with when it comes to a customs broker. And then that needs to be done before pretty much anything else can be done. We can't get you a bond. We're not supposed to even look up to see if you already have a bond, anything with your EIN. Some do, but I'm very risk averse. So I say, give me the power of attorney first. We'll see if you need a bond, then we'll get you a bond, but we really can't do anything for you until that power of attorney is signed.
Absolutely. And we had another question here about just general advice when you are moving into a new country or a new region or a new market, best practices for approaching that new market, or maybe a person to start with for contact when you're entering a new region.
I would say due diligence, reach out to the SMEs in those areas. If you're looking at sending your goods into Egypt, for example, go and find a broker there, talk to them, get somebody else who's already doing it and, has a decent reputation. You got to be really careful though. Some countries, it's really hard to find honest people who have decent reputations and really know what they're doing. Some countries are really good about it. They're very much rule followers. Germany comes to mind. You just talk to them, and most brokers are kind of like me. We like to talk, and so we'll tell you everything we know, just because it's swimming in our heads, and we just got to get it out every so often, like a little relief valve.
Absolutely wonderful. Another question coming in. What is the minimum size of goods for a bond requirement with respect to air shipment?
So you can go without a bond up to $2,500 in value. Now, up to $800 comes into the United States under what's called Section 321. So that is where duties are not required, a bond is not required. It still has to be filed. And depending on the product itself and if, where it kind of falls in the tariff, it usually qualifies. 800 to 2,500 is what's called, it's informal entry. So the informal entry doesn't require a bond, but we have a policy to go ahead and put one in place. And the reason being is it's less costly to put in an informal bond than it is to pay if it's wrong. So you don't have to have one. We have a policy. Again, I'm risk adverse. So we have a policy to go ahead and put a bond on an informal entry, just so we know that everything's covered in the event, and especially because we work with such small companies and they tend to be higher risk. I know I'm risk averse and I work with the highest risk type of industry.
But that's a good person to have in that position, because you don't want to be risky in a risky industry.
Right?
Absolutely. We had another question here about just general best practices for staying on top of tariffs and duties and just making sure that you're not falling behind on those.
So work closely with your broker. I'd let my clients know when things are coming down the pike that I hear about in the industry. So if I have, like with UFLPA that was coming down, I was telling my clients, hey, you need to be aware of this. This is something that's going to affect you. When they started talking about decoupling from China, I told my highly, subsidized Chinese importers, hey, you guys need to be aware of this. This is happening. So I would say work with a broker that is going to be very informative for you. And then make sure that when it comes to duties and stuff like that, because we have an ACH program, we just let you know, hey, here's your 7501. This tells you how much duties are going to be expected in 10 days. And then right before we process the payment, we send you another notice saying this is going to process a couple of days out, and just be ready for it. Make sure that your bank account has plenty of money, because you don't want to bounce that fee. I can direct you to a lot of people who'll tell you why.
Yeah, absolutely. We had one question come through on the registration about where do you find your broker? Where do you find the professional help? Is it a Google search? Is it something where you're going to maybe meet with 5 to 10 people before you find the right fit? What does that process look like?
So you can go to cbp.gov and then actually go under trade. So there's a trade tab and then import export, and then it'll give you a map of the United States. So if you want to work with somebody local, you just click on that map and see who you can find in your area. So it kind of depends on you. All customs brokers now have what's called a national permit. So we can import goods around the country. It doesn't matter if it's coming through New York or California. I'm located in Washington, D.C. I can handle it. It doesn't matter where it's at. and all the brokers are now that way. That's a recent change. So you can, you can work with anyone that you just feel a good vibe with, someone who's willing to talk to you and, say, hey, here's what's going on. I also recommend going to conferences, compliance conferences, and finding out what kind of questions they ask. So this is how you know someone knows what they're doing. If you're at a compliance conference and they start asking questions of the panelists, like, hey, do you know this and you know that? That's where you're going to be like, hey, that's someone who's going to be on my side. So I recommend, bite the bullet, pay the money, go to a compliance conference or an NCBFAA conference and just meet them, meet the people who are there. ICPA has them, NCBFAA has them, ISM, I think, has them. So, you just Google International Trade Compliance Conference and you'll find probably 50 of them in the next year.
Absolutely. And just for curiosity's sake, what is the process like if you want to end that relationship with a broker and maybe move to do you have any practices for maybe either as the business owner or the broker when that relationship maybe isn't working or it's time to reevaluate?
Yeah, if it's not working, you really don't want them to handle your stuff, you can report it to the port director and you can say, hey, this broker has my power of attorney. I don't want them to, to have any kind of good, hold or anything on my stuff because you just had a major falling out, whatever it is. So you can report that to the port director and they will no longer have a power of attorney. And I recommend that you also tell that broker because they're going to think that you're still their client and they didn't know that they ticked you off for some reason. And then, so that's one way to do it. The other way is just tell them that, hey, I'm going with somebody else. I've had clients who left and went somewhere else. I mean, typically they come back a couple of years later going, I'm so sorry, but but you have the ones who decide to go with a forwarder that also has a customs broker department and they decide that, hey, we're going to we're just going to get somewhere that's more one-stop shopping, and that's fine too. But also keep in mind, freight is a completely different animal than customs, and it's monitored and controlled and regulated by two very different government entities. So it's not just, oh, well, it's customs, so it's also freight. No, I am regulated by Customs and Border Protection. Freight companies are regulated by the Federal Maritime Commission or FMCSA, which is a safety something. So Federal Motor Safety Commission or something like that. So, there's a lot of different entities in the US that control different sectors of trade. Like I said earlier, FDA is a government department. It controls food and drugs. USDA controls natural foods. So there's all kinds of different things. So if you're going with a one-stop shopping kind of solution, ask them those questions like, what all does their customs program do? Like, do they actually provide consulting? That
Absolutely. Wonderful. Speaking of the FDA, we had a question come through, and this may be one that needs a little more time offline, but for foods in the FDA, is salt considered food for internal use? So like salt, and I'm assuming other spices might fall into that category as well?
Yes, spices actually fall under USDA in their APHIS department. So that is something that you would have to, and it's a mineral as well. So that's something that could get complicated, but it's something that should do some due diligence, talk to an expert and say, okay, what does this look like? They might charge you a consulting fee to do a little bit of research on it to see what the new regulations are. But yeah, salt is considered, if it goes on food, if it is ingested, it's considered a food product or a drug.
Perfect. And next question, we had another one come in. What is the best process for record keeping A1A documents? Should the company rely on the freight forwarder or customs broker to keep records on the forwarder's website?
No. So the customs broker is by law required to keep records for 5 years. However, that doesn't mean it pertains to the actual importer. So we have it in our terms and conditions that we keep records for 5 years and we give them to customs if customs asks for them. It doesn't mean we keep it on your behalf. So you should keep your own. That's kind of the point of that. You should keep your own records. I recommend actually doing it 2 ways. I would have a cloud service that keeps it so you can always access it wherever you are. I would also have a hard drive. I actually have like a 2 terabyte hard drive. I don't know if you can see it, that I keep it as well for backup in the event something happens with my cloud service for whatever reason. So I would say have both, and keep those in there. And then of course, very, very meticulous, by shipment, by customer, and then make sure that you have, like, I have it down to the type of document that I get on some of my clients, because some of my clients I get invoice, some of my clients I get invoice, bill of lading, arrival notice, and ISF information for 5 different suppliers. So I keep that all very separated. That way, if I ever have to look for something, it's easier to look. So your best practice is to make sure that you're keeping it electronically. You do not have to print it. Don't waste the paper if you don't you don't want to. You don't have to print it. You can very much keep it electronically. That's the best way to do it.
Absolutely. And just another question here, any best practices? I know when we're talking about international, you are dealing with US law and international law as well. Are there any best practices or resources that you know of for keeping track of constantly changing regulations in a global market? Or is that something you just got to be on top of with due diligence?
It's I say watch the news. There's some key indicators that will tell you when basically what to expect to happen. So for example, when Russia attacked Ukraine, anyone in trade knew that we were going to start having problems with trade with Russia, right? Because, well, I'll keep my political views to myself. And now we've got, Israel and the Gaza Strip. And so it's, it's a war zone. So those are things that, just watch the news, be on top of it. Don't live under a rock. And, I watch the news every day, and half the time I want to crawl back into bed and just go to sleep and pretend like the world doesn't exist. But unfortunately, most world events affect this industry. If you are looking at what China, issues between China and Taiwan, or China and the Philippines, those are things to keep a beat on. So I'd say keep your thumb on the pulse of what's going on around the world, and that can kind of give you a clue to something changing. Also, keep up with the Federal Register. The Federal Register is a really good way to find out what's coming down the pike, because basically they're giving you a notice that something's going to happen. And if you don't like it, you should comment as to why you don't like it and give them a good case as, thank you and respectfully, this is going to really put me out of business. Those kinds of things. So Federal Registers are another really good one. And then the CBP website, NCBFAA website. I also subscribe, find the letters that you can subscribe to and the websites you can subscribe to. Brown Miller Law, STR, Sandler Travis, and he's going to kill me from forgetting his name. Rubenstein, I think. So any kind of international trade law firm tends to have these kind of media outlets where they will email you a daily letter or a weekly letter and kind of let you know what's changed. Diaz Law is another one that does it. So if you're in the industry, again, this is why we go to conferences. You meet these people, you get put on their mailing list, and then the emails come in and you just kind of keep up with, and sometimes it can be too much. So if it becomes too much, unsubscribe from a few of them, but get the ones, like I think STR is probably the most comprehensive of what's going on, and I'm usually opening their stuff. So
absolutely. We had one question here that I think is a little interesting. When you're importing like consumer goods and things like that are going directly to the customer, is it better to ship directly to the customer or to have it come to you first and then have you ship it out from a domestic site?
That depends on your business model. If you are like, okay, that's going to get a little complicated. Hold on. If you are importing like a small, let's say phone cases, right? Those are low value goods, and you can get them, basically drop ship them straight into the market, and it'll go straight to your customer. And, That's fine. A lot of companies do that. A lot of stuff, if you buy it on Facebook, does it. I mean, buyer beware, because I've gotten a lot of crap on Facebook. But, for the most part, yeah, you can go straight to your client, especially if it's less than $800. You can invoke Section 321, which makes it a, no duty item, which can be very helpful. However, small parcel shipping per piece costs a lot more than freight shipping. So if you have a lot of customers and you're trying to satisfy a lot of orders, it can be a lot less expensive to use ocean freight and, bring it in a container, or even air freight on one pallet, an actual air freight, not parcel, and you'll spend a lot less per piece. And that, and then you get, like, for example, if you have someone doing in Section 321 and they're going to charge you their normal rate, that could cost you $115. Right, for the normal rate, on top of the shipping, on top of, everything else that you paid for. But if you bring in a full air freight, like a full pallet of goods, it'll cost you the same $115 for that full pallet. If you bring in a full container of goods, guess what? It's going to cost you the same $115 for that full container. Depending on who you use, of course, because every broker makes up their own costs. So that's what it comes down to your business model. You can also put your goods into a foreign trade zone. If your goods are in a foreign trade zone, you delay the payment of your duties until after your goods sell, which can also be helpful. So that's a much more complicated question than you think.
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes what we think are the simplest questions end up being the ones that need the most time to answer. We did have one question, and this may be another one that isn't the easiest to answer, but just looking at the NGO space and nonprofits, is it the same for if a nonprofit or someone in that industry is looking to go into importing or exporting? Is it the same process as a for-profit industry?
Mostly. I mean, typically they're still bringing in product, and the product, if it's going to be sold, even if it's religious stuff, like I've had people try to tell me that, well, I'm importing rosaries and therefore it's, it's duty free. Well, are you selling the rosaries? Because if you're selling them, guess what? It's not duty free. Or at least it's not automatically duty free. I'd have to look at the HTS on that. I had someone tell me I put Merry Christmas on my glasses and therefore no, that's not really how that works. I've actually seen people on panels say that, and I'm like, that's not true. So if you're an NGO and you're bringing stuff into, to basically sell, yeah, that's still going to have a duty. You're putting it in commerce. So think of it that way. If you're putting something into commerce, you're going to pay that duty. However, if you're bringing in, let's say, a statue for a church, that's duty free. And that comes in under Chapter 98, which is a very specific part of the chapter, but that's for religious products. Some books can actually come in under that chapter as well.
Interesting. Absolutely. Well, Kimberly, we have covered so many things in this hour today. If you had one thing from the presentation and the questions today that you wanted to reemphasize, or if there anything that we didn't get to cover that you want to leave the audience with today?
Just contact the people who are in the know. I mean, don't try to go it alone. This is one of those things. It's getting more and more complicated every year that I'm doing this. I feel like I should retire just so it doesn't get complicated anymore. But make sure that you're reaching out, whether it's me. And if I don't know, I reach out to other colleagues who do. So if you're looking at participating in trade shows, I have colleagues who do that. If you're looking at getting, setting up a foreign trade zone, I have a colleague who does that. And we all pretty much work together. While we're competitive, we're still very friendly. So make sure that you're working with a broker who knows what they're doing, who is competent, who has some, good reviews. And if you don't know for sure, you can always contact CBP and ask them to give you a list of the brokers in the area where you're at. And, just ask them questions, ask them, see if you get a good rapport, and, make sure that they are on top of the new regulations, and ask them questions about new regulations. If they're hemming and hawing about answering it, then maybe they're not on top of it.
Absolutely. Wonderful. Kimberly, thank you so much for joining us today. We are so grateful for your time and all of these amazing insights. We're very grateful that you came and spoke with us today.
Thank you so much. I hope everybody learned something. And if you have any other questions, please just contact me. I'm happy to answer.
Wonderful. And to our amazing audience, thank you as well for joining us today. We hope to see you back online soon. You can sign up for future events using the link in the chat, and we will see you guys next time.